During the night of the 1st of November 2007, Meredith Kercher was brutally murdered during her year abroad in Italy. The case will reach international attention, with the accused parties at the center of it, but the real victim never got her spotlight. Today, that'll change. This is the story of Meredith Kercher. Mic check, mic check. Your voice sounds like shit, but if that thing ain't deceiving me, you also look it. It's all matching, it's all leveling up. That is one way to do mic check. Welcome to the new year, motherfuckers. Well, friends and associates, I hope that you have had great Christmas, amazing New Year's, even better New Year's Eve, that you didn't have any meltdowns that you queued for 11:45, quarter to midnight, and so that you don't cry going into New Year's. Sounds like yet again a personal story, Maya. But the energy is about to change because we're going into another deep dive. And you know, the deep dives mean that, yes, I get sick, I lose my voice, but they also mean that the information that I need to conjure up on the internet actually physically affects me. And this case was in need of one such deep dive as much as it is soul destructive, because nobody has done it this way. So let me just say it within the first minute of this video. If you are looking for the Amanda Knox show, this isn't a deep dive for you. Thank you for finding my channel. This isn't it. This story needed a redoing, and it needed to be told from the perspective of the actual victim that was murdered on the night of the 1st of November 2007. In order to do that, I will be, especially during this part, using the book that Meredith's dad, John, has written on her, so about 90–95% of the information in this first parter will be from there. So in terms of structure, this parter will fully just focus on Meredith. Her life, her legacy, her relationship with her family and friends, her love for Italy, her trip to Perugia, and then the last day of her life. Then in part 2, we will be picking up from there. We'll be talking about the crime scene, all of the evidence, literally breaking it down room by room. It might be my most detailed one yet. The amount of details I'm going to offload and probably record that one tomorrow is gonna be insane. So the first part I plan to release on a Thursday, the second one on a Monday, so you don't have to like wait for that long. And then the third parter is going to be the pre-trial, the trial, the appeals process, and basically the conclusion of the whole case. Hopefully, unlike with the last deep dive that I have done, I actually don't prolong it to part 4. But, you know, don't blame it again on the messenger. If I do, I just want to do them properly. I just want to do this case justice. Just before we dive into the story and I tell you about the life and the legacy of Meredith Kercher, I just, like I've done with my past deep dive, probably all of them to be honest, I just want to remind people that I've got a time. I'm a small creator, okay? If you in the comments feel inclined to publish some shite about the victim's family, or just, you know, theories that have absolutely no basis, or to feel like you have the need to tell me that I have forgotten information that was published in like a tabloid and that I didn't include everything ever written on some of the possible perpetrators that have been exonerated of this crime, yeah, don't do it, I'll block you. I have the time, as I mentioned, especially the first part. If there's anything negative about the Kerchers, I will block you. As you know, I tend to be mostly connected with either the expat stories, the immigrant, the tourist stories, or just women either disappearing abroad or being found murdered. Those are the stories where I find that it would be my own parents' worst nightmare, and where people either aren't aware or what needs doing or how those cases are handled. I know it because I covered Lucy Blackman case, Lost Girls of Panama, so you can also watch those, and we just need to bring more awareness in general of how actually families of the victims are coping when something like this happens. How are they dealing with it when there is a language barrier, where there is barrier in laws? It just isn't spoken about as much. And in order to do that, we are here to talk about the victim, the people involved, the evidence, and the outcome, and mostly to focus on this being Meredith's story. To do that, I have read the book behind that I would recommend to every single person. If you actually want to just sit in it, to actually figure out what the family was going through and their whole perception of it, I would definitely recommend John Kercher's book. And as I mentioned, about 99% of what I'm telling you today is from it. So let me try my best to tell you about the life and the legacy of Meredith Kercher. Our story starts on November the 1st, 2007, around 2:15 p.m. Meredith's dad, John, is inside of a bank here in Croydon, close to his home, and he's just withdrawing some cash. And Meredith was the one to call, so he finds this odd because usually they have a talk after his work and her school, so sort of like 6 p.m.-ish, which would probably be like 7 p.m. in Italy. And usually he calls her because of the roaming charges. If she makes international calls, it costs her more. So he is quite surprised by this call. They only chat for about 2 minutes, but we learn that Meredith actually called him because it is a bank holiday in Italy. So 1st of November is kind of like All Saints Day, so most of the banks, shops, etc. are closed, and she's just chilling. She doesn't have university on that day, so she will spend that evening meeting with her English friends. So she tells him, don't call me at 6 p.m., I'll be out, but we can speak tomorrow. About the call, John in the book would say, I didn't realize that it would be the last time that I would speak to her. She told me she loved me, and my final words to her were love you too. The next day, on November the 2nd, around 5 p.m., Arlene, who is Meredith's mom, calls John, her dad, to say that she has seen on the news how a female British student was found murdered in Perugia. And at this point, Arlene and John were divorced already for about 10 years, and Arlene was living at a separate location in Old Colston in Surrey. The first thought that popped into John's head upon hearing this, he was of course rattled, he was worried, but as much as you don't want this to happen to anybody, once you hear such news, you're trying to immediately justify it, saying, there are other British students in Perugia, like it is literally one of the favorite locations for people to study for a year abroad. Like it couldn't possibly be Meredith, it couldn't be my child. John tells Arlene that he is going to search for more information. He was already a journalist, so he already had some years of experience and sort of knew what he was doing. He at first thought, well, if this was our family, the Foreign Office in the UK would have already gotten in touch to inform us, like we are the family, we would have known. But he also decided to ring Daily Mail Foreign Desk, so there's a whole department of people covering the stories from abroad, and he decided basically to just use that knowledge that that department exists to ring them and see if they know of everything, because that would again have been a breaking story. So he does exactly that. And upon ringing the foreign desk editors of Daily Mail, they say that yes, a British girl has been found abroad, but the mobile phones of hers have been found, and the police, upon finding those phones, have already been in touch with people in London. So John's hopes rise again, because that means that that family has been informed. It's not the Kerchers, it's not Meredith. So he rings back Arlene to tell her that, and both of them suddenly feel relieved. However, John has also told the foreign desk editors of the Daily Mail to basically keep him in the loop, to, ring him back if they have the name. And later that afternoon, he gets that call. John said, "I shall never forget her words. The name going around Italy," she says, "is Meredith." Just as he found out and called Arlene back, she told him that the Foreign Office has actually called her and they have confirmed that it was indeed Meredith. So they have gathered all of their children, Stephanie, Lyle, and John Jr., and went to Arlene to just grieve collectively. And at 9 p.m. that evening, the photo of Meredith started circulating the news. Something that strikes me from the book that really applies to that period of time once the family actually found out of Meredith's death and then, of course, had to wait for her body to be returned to them to the UK is again just the numbness of it all, just the unknown of what needs to happen next. Because you think that there is a procedure in those cases, that the Foreign Office is going to have some sort of budget, some sort of financial support to your family, but that just doesn't happen. What John Kercher really drills into you so well during this book is that helplessness. How the family has just received the worst news of their life and nobody's there to help them. During their grieving process, they are the ones that need to initiate everything. They need to call the Daily Mail in order to find out the news. They need to speak to the Foreign Office. They need to hire a lawyer down the line. They need to figure out what happens with the transportation of Meredith's body. How long does the autopsy take? That basically need to do everything from scratch without financial support from anybody. So during that process, Stephanie, Meredith's sister, told them that some of her old school friends were going to lay floral tributes at the gates of the old palace of John Whitgift School in Croydon, which was the school where Meredith studied for 8 years. And at this point, when the family did go there to meet Meredith's friends to have the memorial for her daughter and sister, they were pursued by the members of press. And on this, John said that he was expecting it. He was a freelance journalist, he knew how this was going to go, he knew that the press was going to pick up on a story of a gruesome murder of a British student that happened abroad, but he still found a lot of reporters to be quite respectful. And I found that to be interesting, and I think that it has happened that way, and that this case still holds such an emotional weight for so many people here in the UK because it didn't happen here. The murder didn't happen here. Because when it usually happens in the same country, you kind of see, especially in that country, then how the attention goes immediately to the killer. How immediately there is a shift where the victim is kind of just left behind. And I think for this case, especially from the coverage of like every single article that I have seen on it in the UK, the focus is still very much on Meredith. That is in comparison of how this case is portrayed in Italy and in the US. But what the Kerchers have expected was for the autopsies to be done, for the police in Italy to figure out what had happened, to make the arrest. The Kerchers simply had no idea if British police is in touch with the Italian authorities. They just didn't seem aware of any international procedures. So again, they get in touch with Scotland Yard, and here a detective tells them that the autopsy on Meredith's body is automatic in Italy, so they don't have to do anything. There was a crime here, so of course it will be performed. But if the accused parties, if they do find who did it through DNA and they hire lawyers, there might be a second autopsy. That second autopsy won't happen, but still the family will have to wait for 6 weeks before Meredith's body reached the UK. During that time, the only thing left for the family to do was to follow this story online, and the only comfort that they have had were through all of the tributes that people left. John said that even in her death, Meredith reached out to people. He got messages of sympathy coming from people all over the world. The letters from Brazil, Australia, Netherlands, US, and South Africa, some addressed to family, some personally to Meredith, and so often the strangers would pinpoint what the family already knew as Meredith's traits, as if these strangers had already known her. Her smile, what a beautiful person she seemed. Even in death, she reached out to people. So sitting there, reading those messages seemed to bring Meredith back for a fleeting moment to the family. John said, "My daughter, alive, vibrant, laughing. I could almost imagine that I was about to hear her voice from another part of the flat." When they weren't reading the tributes, the emails that the public has been sending to Meredith, they started learning through the online articles that the police already had set their eyes on the possible suspects. One of them being the flatmate that Meredith had shared her accommodation with, Amanda Knox. Before Amanda Knox takes the central piece of this investigation, let us go back in time and do what hasn't been done before online and actually speak about Meredith and her childhood. Meredith's full name is Meredith Susanna Cara Kercher, and she was born on December the 28th, 1985, meaning she would have been 36 years old today. And also meaning that less than 2 months after she was murdered, she would have been turning 22 years old. Her dad speaks about how grieving as it is would have already been the worst, but because it had happened with her upcoming birthday, when they still didn't know when the autopsy is going to be performed, when they're even going to have their daughter back to put her to rest, all that he was left with were all of the memories surrounding Meredith's previous birthdays. As he'd be going through the family albums, all of those memories would be coming to life. Suddenly, a picture of Meredith near a fireplace opening her Christmas presents triggered a memory of John drawing small footprints inside of that fireplace in order to make believe that there was an actual Santa Claus who, during the night of Christmas Eve, as everybody was sleeping, was actually coming down the chimney to deliver the presents. He remembers how then, usually during the day, if it would snow, they would go into this open area in Old Colston that's called Happy Valley, that is this park with around 1,500 acres of snow, and Meredith loved to play there. He remembers the bond that Meredith shared with her sister Stephanie. Apart from the two of them looking like they were twins, they always had a really strong bond, and Stephanie to this day has been the spokesperson for the whole family. But they were kind of a dynamic duo since they were little, so John remembers how they would act as grown-ups, giving him like sherry and a mince pie as they were enjoying Christmas. And then with time, the point of contention kind of became, for so many people, you will probably understand this, if your birthday is around like a major holiday like Christmas or Easter, well, usually that means that, people, your family has to buy presents for both, but also it doesn't feel as special. John speaks about how they would usually eat so much for Christmas time, and then 3 days later it's Meredith's birthday and they are all kind of like stuffed. It just doesn't feel the same. So what they did, Stephanie's birthday was in the summer, so they kind of, made sure that both of them, Meredith and Stephanie, do something together around Stephanie's birthday, and they would invite people to the garden, so they kind of shared it in a way, even though they were months apart. And going down the memory lane, the most vivid one surrounds the story of Meredith's birth. You see, Meredith was supposed to be born earlier on. Her due date was actually Christmas Day, so everybody expected her to be born, 24th, 25th, but something that is going to follow Meredith through her whole life was that she was always late, so it would be really awkward if she wasn't also born a couple of days later than she was actually due. So it was only the 28th that Arlene was taken to Guy's Hospital in London. And it was only 6 o'clock in the evening that John actually got the call that they can go to the hospital for the birth, meaning she still wasn't in labor. So in a car was John, who was 9 at the time, Lyle, who was 7, and Stephanie, who was only 2 years old. Everybody super excited, because the catch was that they actually didn't know the gender of the baby. So this was going to be a surprise for everybody. But you know what wasn't surprising and what makes this story so insane and so 2007 somehow? Listen, follow me. So basically the car breaks down because it's super cold. It's 28th of December. So they have to actually catch a train. You know, global warming didn't hit yet. It used to snow in the UK. So they have to catch a train. They go into the hospital. And here the nurse is basically telling them all to wait. And John is saying, well, if her, labor has started, you are suddenly trying to remember the words. If her labor has started with all of the children, look at them, there's 3 of them. I know how long my wife's labor lasts. She is going to give birth in about 20 minutes. And the nurse is just looking at him like, sure, yeah, you definitely know what you're talking about. So basically she tells them all to go just to cafeteria, like have a coffee, eat dinner. And he listens to her, and of course, by the time he has returned, Meredith has already been born. This story, alongside the one of the footprints in the fireplace imitating Santa's descent from the chimney, will set the precedent for Meredith's life. She really, just like her own father, enjoyed stories, especially the bedtime stories when she was little. From the age of 3, he would just sit down and make up stories to Stephanie and Meredith as they were going to sleep. What is so epic about these bedtime stories is that usually either Meredith or Stephanie would be the central character. As Meredith was the youngest kid, she would be the one listening to these bedtime stories in the end by herself, so her dad would sort of even write up these stories, like short stories about 500 words, and then read them out to her. Eventually, writing one short story after the next, John Kercher combined them into a 60,000 word novel that he called The Strange Case of Miss Carla. And Miss Carla was based on a real human who was the next door neighbor, this elderly lady called Muriel Babbitt. And Meredith and Stephanie spent a lot of time there. She was kind of like a free babysitter for the girls. She adored the girls and they loved her. She would invite them to her home. They would play jigsaw puzzles. Sometimes they'd help her in the garden because she was elderly and weak. But the catch in the novel that her dad wrote was that Miss Carla was quite a mystical character. She traveled through time and she was becoming younger as Meredith was becoming older. Sort of like Benjamin Button case, but there was another twist to it. They had such a great relationship with this neighbor, with real Mrs. Babbitt, Muriel, that her son-in-law was a steam railway enthusiast. He lived only a few miles away, and during the summer, in his garden, he had this whole makeshift railway track, sort of like a miniature, but it was actual steamed power trains, where then other enthusiasts would bring their own engines as well that would be put onto the tracks. And during this time, it was kind of like a display for him, but he would always invite the Kerchers. So all of the kids, especially the youngest ones, Stephanie and Meredith, loved riding around that garden, which just sounds like a dream childhood. Also gives me CSI miniature killer vibes, but I suppose if they can actually ride the trains, it's not like miniature. It's just the coolest childhood that I'm picturing. And that childhood could have actually had a really twisted turn when Meredith was 2 years old, but it didn't. And that was in October of 1987 when a hurricane came through Old Colston. At the time, Meredith and Stephanie were sharing a room in the end of the house. Luckily, John and Arlene realized that this isn't just regular wind, that this is something a lot more dangerous, so they huddled all of their children away from their rooms in the upstairs landing. And this has proven to be a life-saving decision because soon after they did that, there was a crash of glass and the 80-foot tree slammed across the back of the house, smashing exactly through the girl's bedroom window. And her dad said that even though she wasn't even 2 years old, she saw the devastation that this had brought to the house. But even then, the whole family managed to make something good out of it. So, because there were trees that had fallen in their garden, they made a bivouac. I swear I have listened to the pronunciation of this word. It's like a camp, but from the trees and the branches. So they managed to turn it around so that Meredith and Stephanie and Lyle and John Jr. could still play and sort of turn that whole devastation into something good, where the children just won't be scarred for life. Other memories of Meredith's childhood that tumbled back to John after the days of her passing were all about how expressive she really was, all throughout her young days and then that followed her into the future. Meredith Kercher's name should stand next to a definition for an extrovert. Merriam-Webster, get on it, Oxford Dictionary, what are you doing? Just what are you waiting for? Because whether it is her imitating Slash from Guns N' Roses with her sort of damp hair, putting a hat on, making sure that she slings forward for that picture with the guitar over her shoulder, or whether it is her going into her first ballet lesson and just owning it. Meredith would own every single room that she was in. There are pictures of her in this whole ballet gear because she would go to ballet lessons from the age of 6. And her dad remembers that these ballet lessons just enhanced her love for storytelling, for a good performance, and a good play. One weekend, the ballet school that she was attending arranged for a dance troupe to come and teach them the routines of a famous musical called Starlight Express. And these were the professional teachers that were just teaching, well, the students that were playing it at the amateur level, including Meredith and Stephanie. And they were taught how to perform one of the top numbers for that show. From that point on, it is as if Meredith was introduced to this whole different world. Throughout the next few years, she would go to see the routine for the musical Grease. She was always a fan of other musicals like Flashdance and Strictly Ballroom, and she never wished to be a performer. She was just involved on the amateur level and also liked to watch good storytelling unfold, whether it was on the scenes or whether it was on the theater stage. Because this is the passion that Meredith shared with her dad, they would go together to see musicals like West Side Story, Cabaret, and Chicago. One of the highlights of Meredith's young teenage years was when they got the complimentary tickets from the press agencies to go and see Liza Minnelli perform at the Royal Albert Hall here in London. And here they actually got to go backstage, and Meredith was just in awe with just the celebrity lifestyle, with the other figures that were chatting with her, and it kind of just harbored in her even more the wish to perform. One other memory that John holds dear was when Meredith was about 15, they went to the local theater in Croydon to see this American girl group called Sister Sledge. John already met and interviewed them before, so because of the friendly relationship that they had, they invited him and Meredith onto a tour bus later. And here Meredith was just sitting and watching her dad chat with the band about which city they're going in next, where they're staying there. And she just kind of observed, like, oh, you must be friends because you know where they're performing. To which then John had to tell her and introduce her to a concept of a tour schedule that is published somewhere, and that, when people are doing this on a professional level, other people know it too. Like, I'm not friends with all of the famous people, which I just find so heartwarming. Like, imagine, you kind of have to break it down to a daughter, like, I'm actually not like as famous as you see me right now at this very moment. Other passions of Meredith that her dad would remember dearly, apart from her loving a good performance, loving a good storytelling experience, and also being constantly late to everything, was shopping. Her dad remembered like literally every city where they would go to, whether it would be Brighton and the Lanes area, which if you haven't been to Brighton, UK, please go. It's like such a great city. It's like such good vibes. And the Lanes area is literally like sort of close to the center, but still close to the beach at the same time. Now it has really good coffee shops, but back then it was more just like shops. So whether it is Brighton, whether it is when they actually traveled to Italy and France before, how Meredith always loved a great shopping experience. How sometimes when they would go, for example, to Selfridges in London, which isn't cheap, by the way. Like, Selfridges is one of the biggest shopping centers here in central London, isn't cheap at all. Her dad remembers saying that he should have actually packed lunch because, you know, Stephanie and her just went like department by department, floor by floor, and he was like, okay, so it's kind of getting time to eat something. It's been hours, get the hell out. And then even eventually when they would get out, he remembers how much they loved then following that shopping spree by lunch and then just going home where Stephanie and Meredith would sort of put on the new outfits, showcase them to one another while the whole family was basically just looking at it being like, wow, you have spent so much money, but you love it so much. You love this experience and sharing it with your sister so much that we don't even feel bad about it. Like, we have spent the whole day in a shopping mall and we don't even hate it because, well, look at her. Look at her happy face. Look at how much she's enjoying this. Those visual memories were the strongest for John, picturing Meredith in the lanes in Brighton or picturing her trying on a new outfit. But then there were also the memories of her voice. Whether it is from 1997 when him and Arlene got divorced and when Meredith was 12 years old, so once he moved out, she recorded Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You on his answer phone. So basically she left him a voicemail and the phone provider eventually deleted it, otherwise he would have had it to this day. Or there are the moments past the divorce where every Friday Meredith would run to him, to his house, to sort of stay for a day, sometimes stays the whole weekend in her school uniform. And here he just remembers all of the memories that she had shared, mostly actually surrounding the TV series Friends. He says that Meredith had a photographic memory. She would see a scene once and she would remember it. Her favorite characters were Chandler, Joey, and Phoebe, and there was one particular episode that always stuck out to them, and it's the one where Joey is sort of pushed by the caretaker of the building to improve his dance techniques, so he dances with another man who wants to impress his own dance partner. And because Meredith was so obsessed over this episode, but also the show on its own, John eventually bought 6 box sets of it and gave it to her because she would just tirelessly watch episode after episode. Then there were, of course, the other memories that came with the sadder connotation. When she was 17 years old, Meredith decided to take up karate. And it came quite as a surprise to her family, you know, she was into ballet, into performances, but never like into martial arts of any sort. But regardless, she just said it felt like something she wanted to do. She didn't have any friends in that area, she didn't know anybody, she just wanted to test it out, and she joined it a year before she would go to University of Leeds. So when she was 17, she just signed up to karate classes at this local club in Colsden, and she was from what I got on her third belt. So within a year before she was to go to Leeds, she was on her third belt and she was aiming to get a black belt in karate. This came with a sadder connotation, as I mentioned, because her dad would picture, even before he knew what had actually happened to Meredith, whether or not she would use any of those skills in order to defend herself that night. And it is because of her skills, because of her training karate for over a year, that John, from the very early ages of this case, started believing that Meredith had to be overpowered by more than one person. The year after she started training karate, she would enroll into university, and she would move from the Surrey area to Leeds, up north in the UK, where she was to study a degree in European politics and Italian. Here, for the purposes of writing the book, John actually interviewed a lot of her friends. And he learned stuff that, he didn't know about his daughter. He knew that she was a ballet dancer, but he didn't know that she actually didn't mind going to clubs and dancing to her favorite 80s music. He knew that his daughter worked in customer service at Gatwick Airport while studying, but he didn't know just how direct she really was. Her friends told him about the occasion where there was this group of rugby players. There was a rugby team at the airport, and they sort of refused to listen to her, saying to them politely, "Moved out of the point of access area, let other people pass." So she just laid into them verbally, according to John, and everybody was just amused to see the whole rugby team, all of these men, just suddenly have a reality check and remember how to behave and how to address customer service. From all of the friends' accounts, Meredith was extremely hardworking. She would always have a part-time job to support her student loan, to support her studies. So eventually she registered with this promotion agency, and they had her picture on their files. From the book, I am led to believe that this was one picture. And that is important because one day that promotions agency just rings Meredith, telling her would she be interested in being featured in a music video. Meredith was excited. She knew of the artist who was called Christian Leontiu, but she never met him, and she knew she was picked over quite a few girls. So she was buzzing. Her dad actually took her for filming at 7 a.m., and here is where she joined a few people and a film crew. It took almost 15 hours to complete the video, but she was given a free ride home. And later she told him that it was nerve-wracking not knowing anyone she had been working with. In the opening shots of the video, you can see Meredith walking down the stairs and entering the room with other women who were featured, and they're just kind of like observing and being in the presence of Christian and the band that is playing the instruments behind him. I would suggest, because I doubt I will be able to put it in this video for copyright reasons, pausing this right now. If you want to immerse into this story properly, pause it. I will put the link to Some Say, the song by Christian, where Meredith is featured, in the description box. I have listened to it, no joke, at least 10 times. I actually quite like the song by the end of it, but it just helps you understand who she really was, even though, she only appears for like a few seconds in the song. There's just something so powerful. And I can't even start to imagine what this brings to the family. Just re-watching this video, replaying this with Meredith being in physical form, even after all of these years. During the times that she would meet up with her dad while studying, she still hadn't had a clear idea of where she wants to be after 4 years. She thought of either pursuing a career in journalism because of how much she liked performance, storytelling in general, or working at the European Parliament in Brussels. Something that was always obvious to both her dad and her, though, was that she was an avid communicator. It took her no effort, and not just that, but she was already fluent in Italian by the time that she went to Leeds. That was on the back of her just learning it for fun, but also on the back of her previous trips to Italy. So they had begun when Meredith was only 1.5, that one she probably didn't remember herself, but her parents did. Just the fascination that she showed at that young age when they first went to Italy, how fascinated she was by the wood pizza ovens and how, real Italian pizza was made, followed by the school trip when she was only 14 years old. That was on the back of her choosing Italian to study in school, so they had kind of like a 2-week exchange program in Italy. And her family remembers, separating from each and every member of the family, whether it is because they studied at the universities in different cities, they weren't all in Surrey, or simply when they would travel on their own or with schools, was never easy. But they would notice that Meredith was always smiling. Even the last time, before she was to embark on the trip to Perugia, she told her family, "After this experience, I know that Italy is going to be a part of my life forever. I'm not sad because I'm coming back this summer, and someday when I'm older, I know that I'm going to live here." Before Meredith was to embark on a trip to Italy for one last time, she would make a lasting impression on everybody that she would meet throughout her years at Leeds University. There was a lecturer that her dad interviewed, he was lecturing the Department of Italian, that had about 200 undergraduate students, and this man said he has never known anyone to make so many friends in such a short space of time. And this was hard because Meredith still kept up working part-time. So in the first year, she was at the university campus, as many students choose to be, and then in the second year, she moved to this basement flat into a private accommodation. And during those times, she worked part-time at a bar called Vodka Revolution. So she mostly worked nights up until usually 4 or 5 in the morning, which is when she would show up at the flat and, everybody would be waking up to go to classes. So she'd have a quick breakfast, maybe sleep for an hour or two, go to classes, and then return and kind of nap in the afternoon. However, she really made effort to socialize with her flatmates in the few hours that they would have together, whenever she would have a night off, or just in the evenings before she would head off to the bar. One of the flatmates would later say to her dad she really worked hard to earn extra money for her studies. She would still be up and ready for her university lectures, although often late, but she did like cooking and we shared our food. And hearing this brought back the memories of Meredith calling home for a particular recipe, usually for a meal that they would eat on those Friday nights when she would visit from school after her parents got divorced, and then she would call back to say that her housemates actually really enjoyed it. Her flatmates also remember that in the few hours that Meredith would be left to them, they would either go to the gym, nothing strenuous because Meredith was already doing so many things. Her favorite was just going onto a treadmill and just running, or the meals that they have shared, the few times that they would actually go to the club that was on the campus, and how much Meredith actually enjoyed the music of her childhood. And if there was ever a night where they would play the old-timey music, like the music of the 80s, Meredith would be there. Or just the quiet nights where she would be curled up on the sofa watching soaps with them, or playing bananagrams. Have you ever heard of bananagrams? I have went into a rabbit hole looking for what this game entails. Let me tell you. If there are any fans of bananagrams watching this video, tell me in the comments how wrong I am. I watched an ad, okay, and this couple with no chemistry, they were probably like literally 2 people that just walked into the room, were sitting at a table explaining how it's played. So it's kind of like Scrabble, so you have tiles with letters in the middle. And then you take those tiles, you make kind of like a crossword thing. You have to make like complete words, so it's not on a board, it's not Scrabble. And then you play it until there are less tiles in the middle than players in the game, and at that point, whoever has the crossword completed, whoever has the actual words in their wins. Am I right? How off am I? And it's called bananagrams because it comes in like a banana pouch, and then also you call it peeling, like taking the tiles off the thing, something along those lines. I just was so amused. I was like, what the hell is bananagrams? And I spent like half an hour trying to find out. Anyways, back to the story, Maya. It gets grim from now on. All of her flatmates, among everything else, said that they actually valued Meredith's opinion on things. Whether it was just about something that they have heard on the news, Meredith would always have something well measured, unbiased, and interesting to say. An amazing trait of hers was that she was supportive and willing to accompany you to things which you were interested in. For example, sometimes, rugby would be playing on TV and Meredith wasn't really into it. We already know she was into shows and soaps and just watching, good storytelling unfold. But she would actually watch World Cup and send a message to her flatmates saying that she had been watching it play, sort of like falling in love with the game, trying to actually immerse herself into other people's interests. And my favorite thing about Meredith's life was just how easy it was to like figure out her whole essence. Her flatmates speak about how she had such an infectious laughter, how they knew if Meredith was coming out with them, if she wasn't going to work, it's going to be so much fun. But that it will also entail them just waiting for her, whether it was, during shopping sprees or during those nights out where they would have to hold the cab driver's door, just be like, don't put us on the meter yet, she's coming. She just cannot be on time, for God's sake. And possibly my favorite story in this whole book that the flatmates have said was in the first year of uni, Meredith, that's her nickname given by her friends and family, had glandular fever. So for weeks she had this, and once she recovered, they actually noted down the date. And from that point on, next year as well, they held a gland fest. So basically they named the date and it was supposed to be celebrated annually as Meredith's recovery date when she could start eating and drinking and partying again. During the summer in between her first and second year, Meredith got a job to work for one of those London sightseeing tour buses, and here, just as always, she was late to her first day of training. She was supposed to have like an intensive course, basically in history and everything, because if she was to be on a bus, she had to know of the sightseeing spots that she's talking about. And first day of training, she was late, so they sent her back. And she called her dad. She was like, I can't do this, like they're gonna fire me without me even being hired. But they actually called her back and they were quite impressed by her actual knowledge. So everybody kind of like neglected the fact that Meredith was always late to things. And it was in August that year, before she returned to university, that she actually spoke about going to Italy as part of her studies. Now, there were two things in particular that could have actually prevented that, Meredith going to Italy for her year abroad. One of them, both are bizarre, but one of them is somehow the most bizarre thing that I have read for this part. There's so many insane parts in this story. And that was that Meredith met a guy. That isn't the bizarre part. Okay, so this is how it happened. Winter of 2006, she returns to uni and she goes to this dance. And this guy is just sort of dancing at the other side of the room. He looks up and sees Meredith coming onto the dance floor with her friends. He approaches her, and because Meredith was such an extrovert, the two of them keep chatting, and by the end of the night they exchange phone numbers. They sort of start dating. He didn't actually know how it went, he couldn't really read the room for the first couple of dates, but eventually the two of them became official, they started spending all the time with one another, and Meredith actually even spent some holidays with him and his family. Now, the bizarre part of this story was that after around 7 months of dating, this guy starts thinking how he actually wants to marry Meredith. Thinking about it, cool, but he actually acted upon it, and he proposed to Meredith just before her 21st birthday. And of course, Meredith rejected it. It was too early for her to get married. The girl had hopes, aspirations, like she didn't really plan this to happen so fast, and because she rejected him, it kind of got awkward. So the two of them eventually fizzled out and broke up. Her dad says of this is such a dad move. She's like, this was sensible. She had still to finish this year of uni, then go to Italy for her year abroad, then come back, go to another year, and then graduate. You know, they remained friends. It's fine. This was a sensible decision. I just love how she made such an effect on this man that after 7 months of dating her, he decided this is it. He was going to propose. So the two of them remain friends. He was even at her 21st birthday, even though this was kind of like weeks after she rejected him. And her parents say about this moment how who would have dared to even think that this would be Meredith's last birthday. Another event, or as her dad calls it, ironic touch, that could have actually prevented Meredith from ever going to Italy for that year abroad was that she actually chose the course that wasn't including the year abroad in Italy. So here in the UK you can choose to have, well, you can actually choose to have 3-year and 4-year degree. I don't actually know how Leeds operated at that point, whether this would have been a 3-year degree or whether it would have been a 4-year degree without the year abroad. But you can also have the option with, you know, the language degrees to spend the year in the designated country, which is what Meredith thought she had chosen, like 4-year course with the 3rd year spent in Italy. But it wasn't so. So when she figured that out, which was like in the 2nd year, she already had plans, probably packed up what she was going to wear in Italy. Well, she kind of panicked and she spoke to the head of department, and they asked to see her previous assignments. So they saw the last assignment and they saw that she was graded C. So, you know, they were like, that's just not good enough. Like, how are you going to communicate in Italy? It's just not really the grounds for us changing this degree now. But then she told them to look into it because, as was her nature, Meredith would hand her assignments past the due date. And when you hand them past the due date here, they deduct about 10% for each day that you submit them late. So once they actually looked into the assignment, like the quality of it, she was actually at the A level. It was impeccable. So they decided to actually put her on the course that she wanted. And that is why Meredith, for her 3rd year of studying, would actually have the chance to fulfill her dream of studying in Italy. Her family remembers her flying out to Rome in late August of 2007. From there on, she was to travel to Perugia to find her accommodation there. Her and her dad established a routine where she would call him every evening and they would talk about how she was getting on. She was at this point still looking at notice boards for accommodation, and eventually she found something promising. It was a white cottage with 2 Italian female tenants that already lived there, that were kind of professionals. They were older than her. And here was where an American girl was due to arrive a month later. Meredith would tell her dad how the Italian girls called Filomena and Laura were quite friendly, and Filomena was kind of acting out as the landlord of the place, so she was helping her arrange things. And being in a foreign country, Meredith didn't really know how things worked, like what's cheap, what's expensive. So she called him several times just to check if the amount for the deposit was normal, if the rent was supposed to match that or be more or less. And after her dad kind of researched it, he called her saying that that sounds like a normal procedure. Meredith moved into that cottage on the 4th day of her stay in Perugia, and during the next 2 months, her and her dad would talk almost every day. So in October, he found out that Meredith was quite thrilled to go to a 9-day Euro chocolate festival that was happening right where she was, in the center of the city. She would speak about how there were all these sculptures made out of chocolate displayed in the center of the city, and by the end of the festival they were to be broken up and then pieces are thrown into the public, just given to them. So she also bought the couple of favorites that she was tasting during those 9 days, and she was to give them to the family when she was to return home in November for her mom's birthday. We come to the night of the Halloween, which is when her and her friends from uni were just dressing up, making costumes out of the makeshift beanbags. Meredith was dressed as a vampire, and then they proceeded to meet at the club that was called Merlin's. One of her friends, Helen, would say about that night, after a while chatting, laughing, comparing costumes, and taking photographs, we made our way to the 10th floor. It was so busy that we got lost in the crowd, and that was the last time that I saw her. At the age of 20, it never crossed my mind that it might be the last chance to see a friend again. Those first 2 months were such a wonderful and happy time, and although I didn't know Meredith for very long, I shall never forget her. This night won't be the last time that Meredith would be seen alive, though. She made it home alive and well, she slept through the night, and the next day was the 1st of November. So she was supposed to pay her rent that day that she had taken out of the ATM 2 days before. However, Filomena, that she was supposed to give the rent to, was actually at her boyfriend's place most of the day, and if you remember from the beginning of the video, it was the All Saints' Day, so it was a bank holiday. Every single person from that cottage was just chilling with their group of friends, and Meredith was about to do the same. That's why she had a chat with her dad at around 2:15 p.m. and she was supposed to head out to just have a dinner at her friend's place. These were the two friends that she had met through uni, Sophie and Amy. They were British as well, so they came to study for a year abroad. Meredith, of course, met them at uni, became like closest friends, and they were just about to have a casual dinner, eat pizza, and watch Notebook. And that was the plan because, of course, they were drinking last night, they just wanted to chill, and then Meredith was to return home and just do some assignments. When Meredith left her friend's home after eating pizza, ice cream, watching Notebook, her friend Amy told her jokingly, "See you tomorrow at 10." And then she kind of added like 10:30 because we know you, Meredith, we know how you operate. And then her friend Sophie walked her home and left her about 500 meters in front of the cottage, not knowing that that will be the last time she will see her friend alive. From this point on, we pick up with the phone records made from Meredith's phone. At 8:56 p.m., so just as her friend Sophie dropped her off, we have a call. Well, rather, Meredith tried to call her mom, and the call seemed to be interrupted, like there seemed to be no answer. The next call coming from her phone was an hour and 2 minutes later, so at 9:58 p.m., the number 901 was called. And that was an answering machine, so as if somebody is just checking voicemail. And that call has been shut off before the end of the welcome message. After that, the phone immediately locks. The next outgoing call is 2 minutes after that, at 10 p.m., and the number dialed is the first number in the phone book. The name is Abby, but Abby was actually the name of the bank in the UK. I think Abby is now Santander, if you live here. I looked it up, correct me if I'm wrong. But no one is actually called, so it seems like somebody went into the phone book, pressed the number, but the call didn't actually go through because the foreign prefix, the +44, hasn't been entered. The last activity on Meredith's phone happened at 10:13 p.m., so just 13 minutes after the second one. And here it was spotted that there was an internet connection made. So there was a GPRS connection, meaning instead of Wi-Fi, somebody would connect to their mobile data. And it only lasted for 9 seconds, and it was said to be related to receiving an MMS, which MMS, again, if you aren't born in the 90s, there's SMS and there's MMS. MMS is multimedia message, so whether it is a picture, a video, a GIF, anything that's not a text. This MMS message would be deleted, and the prosecution will drive a theory later that Meredith was the person in charge of her phone for all of these 3 events. So the one at 8:56 and then the ones at around 10 p.m. And that she simply deleted that MMS so she doesn't incur any charges by connecting to her data instead of the Wi-Fi. They would admit that her making that call to the bank, calling Abby, which is the first number on the list, would be odd, could be somebody else doing, could be accidental, but then if it was Meredith behind the phone, she would have probably changed the number so that it reflects the +44 if she was to call her bank for some reason, which why would she? The banks here usually shut by 6 p.m. and Meredith would have also probably known that. Unless this is like a customer service number, not like a branch number, in which case, again, would they have been operational? There's never like an explanation for this, but the prosecution would later support their fact that Meredith is just in her room chilling on her phone because of that call to the answering machine. They said that the fact that that call was cut off, that nobody actually listened to any of the messages, again was in line with her frugal habits, that she didn't want to spend any money. That looking at the other habits on her phone, that aligns with it, as in her and her dad would have the calls usually after 6 p.m. when lesser charges would be incurred. However, the cell tower data told a different story. Later, once Meredith's phones will be found, they will check the records as to what was the strongest connection to the cell tower. And the connection to the cell tower happened when that GPRS data was connected. But that cell tower wasn't the one closest to the house. In fact, none of the calls that have been made in that cottage by Meredith that evening or by other people that we will speak about next time have ever connected to that cell tower, giving us a possible theory that that last connection where MMS message was delivered, where the phone was connected to GPRS, and possibly the call to the bank and the call to the answering machine also haven't been made from Meredith's home, as the prosecution will drive the narrative that she was just in her bed, chilling on the phone, doing some normal activities, She was supposed to return home to do her assignments, so that could explain the inactivity on her phone for about an hour. And then she decides to check it, ring the answering machine, try to call her bank for whatever reason, and then finally she gets that MMS message, figures, oh, I have accidentally connected to GPRS data, decides to delete it, and maybe she was at a different angle in the house and somehow the strength of that tower connected to her phone. Let me know which story makes more sense to us. Do you see that as a plausible explanation for the inactivity of about an hour there? Or do you see that there is a story that makes more sense, and that is that Meredith called home after no one responded, something had happened, she had met foul play, and then all of the other activity on her phone had actually been made as an accident by somebody else, her murderer. This data is important as it will be used to establish time of death, and because 12 hours and 17 minutes after the last recorded activity on Meredith's phone, one of her roommates will return to the house, and she will be spending 4 years in jail for her murder. In real time, we meet the Kercher family again, just as they learned of their daughter's death. While they're waiting for the autopsy to be performed, they decide to go to Italy to identify the body. And here John describes how, again, they had no financial help from the Foreign Office, from anybody really. They have all just used their own expenses and savings in order to go and identify their daughter at the morgue. Her dad remembers feeling so numb standing there. He didn't even go in. He left Stephanie and Arlene go in to identify Meredith while he was standing outside, and he remembered one fond memory, one of the last ones that he shared with Meredith. And this was from when she called him from Perugia, when she was trying to make herself feel at home, and she was buying a duvet in order to find something comfortable, in order not to just, live a typical student life where she would just get the bed linen that was given to her. And he remembers her frustrations about how she was determined to track that comfortable duvet down, and how she was asking all of the flatmates and everybody at uni where she could get one such comfortable duvet, only to find out that her body would be found underneath it. On the other side of the door, her sister saw Meredith covered. She said her neck had been covered, which was a blessing because at that stage they only knew that her throat had been cut, causing her death. They had no idea, as would later be revealed, that she had suffered more than 40 wounds prior to being killed. She went on to say, "I still remember looking at Meredith lying there, so still, no breath to be taken, a crisp white sheet pulled up to and over her neck. She seemed peaceful, yet she bore a look of determination, of courage marred with defeat. It was from that moment that we knew we had to fight for her too. Not only for justice for her, but every day for ourselves for her. Mez was my little sister, but she also cared about me and our family like an older one. Meredith never knew how much of an impact she had on people. This was a quality of hers which enabled her to make others laugh, help others when they needed someone to be there, and become someone, without recognition, to aspire to. Meredith had such an incredible presence that the void she has left us with is noticeable every day." After the morgue, the family went to speak to the lead prosecutor on the case, the guy called Giuliano Minini, and he told them he is interviewing different witnesses, it is still during the early stages, there might be the second autopsy, all of that the family will learn. And here he would mention that one of the witnesses that he is interviewing is the American girl that has been a flatmate of Meredith's called Amanda Knox. So he just asks, has she ever mentioned Amanda? And at this stage, the family doesn't really know anything, doesn't know that they aren't really looking at Amanda Knox as a witness, rather as a suspect. So they just say, Meredith said, she sort of knew this girl, that Amanda would sometimes bring different men home, and that she had like poor hygiene habits. Wasn't really much interaction between the two of them beyond just the usual flatmate stuff, Meredith usually hung out with people from her uni. After that meetup with the police, they were asked to make a press conference, and they decided to hire a lawyer in Italy, mostly because of the language barrier. Only Stephanie, Meredith's sister, will be fluent in Italian, so she would be corresponding with others, but of course they needed a lawyer in order for somebody to actually explain to them what is going on investigation-wise. And after that, they returned home, preparing themselves mentally for the long wait for Meredith's body to actually be returned to England. And that won't happen for other 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, the family will be corresponding with that lawyer called Francesco Maresca, either through Stephanie, who would then translate it to them, or they would speak to him through an interpreter. However, the most amount of information that they were still to find about the case, which is just so mind-boggling, would be through the internet, would be through the papers, usually La Repubblica, and then of course that would be in Italian, so they would have to translate the page to English, or wait for a British newspaper to publish the information. Just sit in it for a second. Just the insanity of it all. That they are finding information like how Meredith died, how had she been discovered, who was responsible, the basic questions about their own family member through online articles. And John said at this stage they heard of the name Amanda Knox, but they didn't know that she was considered a prime suspect. They thought she was just a witness. Maybe, they were just talking to her about the time that she left the house, when did she return. They didn't know any of the details. But that was about to change, because through one such scroll through one of those websites, they found why the police was at the cottage where Meredith was living in the first place. They actually found how her body had been discovered. And that story involves a woman called Lana Biscarini, who went into her garden on the morning of the 2nd of November just as normal. However, what she didn't find to be normal was a mobile phone that was just ringing at the bottom of her garden. And Lana happened to have experienced a bomb threat hoax earlier that year. So upon just hearing a random mobile phone in her garden, she kind of freaked out. She thought, well, if that hoax is connected to this phone, I shouldn't be touching it. I'm immediately going to call the police. Once the local police was called, this will be referred as the postal police, which from what I gathered is the one you call when, again, there is some sort of cyber threat, so they're dealing with like telecommunications and things. They would come to the scene, to Lana's garden, and they would find not one, but 2 phones. And one of them would be registered to Filomena. So Filomena gave Meredith one phone to use, the one which would be associated to the Italian number. Upon them reaching the household where this phone had been registered to, the parents will be told by the postal police that they have encountered 2 people standing outside a cottage. Meredith's roommate, Amanda Knox, was standing next to her boyfriend of 7 days, Rafael Solecito, and they were standing next to each other, holding a mop and a bucket. And that is where we are leaving off part 1. Next time we will be picking up from this point on. We will talk about the scene of the crime. We will then go in time in order to learn about the 3 perpetrators that will eventually be charged for the murder of Meredith Kercher, how their paths have crossed. Is there anything in their history, in their background that could have indicated that this would have happened to them? The early stages of investigation will also be covered, all the way up to the pre-trial. So next part is going to be loaded with details. You better come focused. I hope I release it on Monday. I can already sense I'm losing my voice, but I hope I release it on Monday. So join me there. Another quick reminder to be respectful in the comments, because 99% of this part was about Meredith and her life. So if you're putting your theories down, again, bear in mind that they might be reading it, the Kercher family, that is. There is one other conversation that I wanted to start, and I don't know where, and it just fascinates me because I know that there are other true crime books out there where a daughter would go missing or end up murdered, and the father would write the book on it. And I just find that so, I don't even know how to describe, like spiritual on a certain level. In this case, this book is so well written, it is so focused on Meredith, and I kind of know that it is also because of his talent, because of his skills, because he has technically worked in that area. But also I'm thinking, how would that translate, God forbid, if something was to happen to me? And I still think it would be my dad, if anybody, who would write a book. Just be like, I know her, she's my daughter, I know her traits, and be like, you literally weren't really present throughout some of my life. You're not even my favorite parent, but sure, pop off, go ahead, I don't know, I am my father's daughter, I guess. I don't know why I wanted to start this conversation. it's morbid. I'm just curious to know, is there a member of your family where you think like this would be it because this person understands me, even though they're not my favorite parent? Dad, don't learn English. Don't learn English and then watch this. Please, for the love of God, don't. He will not. He literally knows how to say beer. That's it. That is the extent he goes to. And yet you think he would write a book on you. But the dots aren't connecting there. And just, yeah, can you not end it on a weird note? I will be seeing you on Monday for part 2 of this story. You better come focused, because the information I'm about to offload on you in the second parter is insane. I have gone unhinged on this one. Trust me, I've gone unhinged. Pages and pages. Unhinged. I will be meeting you there. Now, goodbye. Wow, that's so cute somehow. You never send kisses, you never blow kisses to the people, because it's creepy. Get up.